Metacognition is an idea Lowry explores in his book. And he talks about how it can make us susceptible to abstract power. So I guess first, to try and define metacognition, I'll start with a quote from the book. Lowry writes, quote, "Sapiens are effectively trapped behind a neocortical cage, unable to interpret the world objectively for what it is without skewing it with imaginary meaning and symbolism. This makes it exceptionally difficult to know what real is," unquote. And he also gives a great example in the book, which is, you can practice anytime, anywhere. Basically, you just open a book, look at the letters and words, and try not to infer any meaning from them. Try to see them as just scribbles. Now, obviously, you can do this if the book's written in a language that you don't know, right? You open a book written in Chinese. If you're me, all I see are scribbles. I don't know what it means, but it's interesting when you try it with a book written in English and you look at it, you can't not see the symbolic meaning. It's like we are superimposing this meaning layer on ink on paper, basically.
And it happens sonically too. Like we'll have those dissociative moments where pancake, 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 you say it enough, and then the word doesn't come to you with any sort of semantic connotation. It's just like this, it's alien to you. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, you're saying if you say the word enough, eventually you can
denature it in some way. And I don't know if you ever had that experience, but sometimes you can't say a word without it already having its meaning pregnant in it. We hear the meaning with the word.
Yeah.
We can't separate abstract and the objective, like sonic signature of the word. They come together.
Yeah.
But sometimes that happens at moments of disassociation where a word, like, it doesn't hit you as a word. It's a set of sounds or something. Yeah.
It's interesting. And yeah, he makes the point in the book that this is different than all other animals. Like, animals sort of see reality as it is, whereas we are always superimposing this symbolic overlay on it. And that's useful. That's our superpower in a way that we can do that, but it also opens us up to exploitation, basically, right? We can be exploited by rhetoric and storytelling, and, it has a whole list of the abstract activities in the book. I'll read a longer quote now, unless you guys.
Well, I just say that, the fact that, to relate it back to metacognition, it's very difficult for us to separate the world outside from the ideas in our head. We construct hypotheses about the world in a form of patterns, then we see those patterns in the world, and there's this flooding out of our metaphors that we use to construct the world internally into the world, and we see them there. We see tree, we don't see the tree, we don't see the individual thing, we see our idea of tree, and that's the metacognitive kind of flaw or weakness that humans have. We don't have the ability to think about, we have the ability to think about thinking, we're just not always the best at it.
Yeah, we often don't stop, well, this is kind of like the what is money question, right? We always often think through money, right? We think in terms of money when you're negotiating, or you're, am I going to buy this or not? Am I going to go on this vacation or not? You're planning, you're paying your taxes, whatever it may be, that you're dealing with money. You're thinking through it, actually. But you don't stop to think about it, right? So the analogy would be, you're looking through your glasses, but we don't often take off the glasses and examine them to see how they are distorting our perception. Basically, that is metacognition, right? Thinking about thinking, or thinking about the terms you are thinking through, right? It could also be about thinking about language, which is, all of these things are interesting rabbit holes. The thing about language and money that's common, there's a number of, maybe more than this, but the thing that's most relevant, in my opinion, is that they're both metaphorical, and that a metaphor is something where you have a target domain and a source domain. So you're thinking about the target domain in terms of the source domain. So you're typically thinking about something unfamiliar or abstract in terms of something concrete and familiar. So, when it comes to money, we're thinking about economic goods in terms of number. and number makes it universally communicable, and we can negotiate and execute trades more quickly, things like that. So yeah, I guess although we have the ability for metacognition, it's a bit of a higher order cognitive capacity that, most people don't even know what the word means, for crying out loud. And so I think those who do understand metacognition can exploit those who do not understand metacognition. And that, to me, points to Plato's old quote that those who tell stories rule society. It's like, if you can manipulate people at that metacognitive abstract layer, then you can engage in programming, basically, right? Like, you can program other people. That's what propaganda is. This is what fake news is. This is what psyops are. So this is a theme we come back to a lot on the show. It's like, it's almost like if there's one thing I could get people, I don't want to say it like that, I don't want to get people to do anything. One thing that I would hope people would learn watching this show is that they are highly programmable. They have a lot of cognitive flexibility. We have very malleable cognitive software, however you want to say it. If you don't take that seriously, then you're going to get programmed by someone else, basically. But if you do take it seriously, then you can program yourself, right? Like, as we said earlier, you can choose the books you read, the people you spend time with, and et cetera, so on and so forth. I'll jump into his next excerpt unless you guys have anything to add to that.
I just wanted to say, so I was going to bring up exactly what you said about once you recognize that you are being programmed, you then are liberated with the idea that you can program yourself.
Exactly.
And perception is something that you don't realize that you have until it changes. Mm-hmm. And you leave that behind and you continually shed these new skins. You realize that I have been accepting the story that's been told to me, but now if I choose, I can be the hero of my own story. I can tell myself my own story. And this is not just philosophical. This is not just dorm room stoner thought. This is the neuroscience of understanding how we perceive the world around us, which is that our eyes prioritize threats because threat is more damaging than reward is additive. Mm-hmm. If for 2 million years, if I rolled my ankle, if I tripped and fell, I might not survive a week.
Yeah.
And so our brains have not evolved to catch up to the non-threatening world that we currently live in. And so we are constantly over-prioritizing threats and taking those in first. That's our first filter through mm-hmm. which we view the world. Mm-hmm. But then, and that is something we have in common with animals. But the second filter is the story that is embedded within our programming. Yeah. It is the filter of narrative mm-hmm. and the way that we view the world. And if you want a different result, then tell yourself a different lie. Change that mm-hmm. narrative, change that story, and view the world in a different way such that you can leave behind the perception that has been constraining you, and you can walk away seeing no spoon and having the power to yes. fly above.
Yes, wonderfully said. Self-limiting beliefs, we often call them. The revelation that meaning is it's co-created, right? There's not, again, when I read the words, I have a certain idea of what the word being, I just picked a word here, being, I have a certain interpretation of what that word means, right? You and I may not share that exact interpretation, and the definition of the world is probably different than both of our interpretations of it, right? Like, I don't know the exact definition. Actually, the word being is really complicated, right? Go straight into metaphysics.
Yeah, that's a great one to pick. Yeah. That's a great one to pick.
But the point is that the meaning is always somehow generated between, right? It's not, it doesn't inhere in any object or word or thing. It's a some kind of middle ground, middle point agreement between two acting agents. So, yeah, it's difficult to think about because you are within the system that you're trying to observe, and you need to take that step outside of the system to get that neutral perspective on the system, but you kind of can't because you're always inside of language. If you're trying to do it with language, it's a little bit easier with money, actually, because money, you don't have to think through money. We can think through just language. But I honestly think that's why the title to the show has been so successful, because it is a metacognitive question. And therefore very philosophically tantalizing for people. So,
It gets a little quantum.
yeah.
It gets a little, I think about this thing, I change this thing changes that thing.
Right.
Two things together.
Yes.
Yeah, it's the deepest question.
Yeah, and the realization that causality is not linear, right? That it's always cause, effect, but then effect changes cause changes effect, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and that you mentioned you can't think yourself outside of systems. And a point that Lowry makes, and that really I think enriches our understanding of abstract power hierarchies, is that they intentionally obfuscate our metacognitive thinking. Like he gives the example of, if you have a king, the king wants to project that he is powerful. And so part of that might be the metonymy of the crown for the king. You have the symbolic, we reduce him to that, this powerful symbol.
That's the word I was looking for.
Yeah, you used that earlier. I was like, that's the perfect word for that. The example he explicitly gives, though, is the king then has an enforcer class of knights. The knights do the king's will. People confuse the king as being powerful because they see the knight's power through him. And so these hierarchies we are within, we hypostatize. That's the word. It's a logical fallacy. Lowry uses it. We attribute misplaced concreteness to abstract things because the hierarchies we are within really are doing it intentionally in a certain sense.
Yeah, it's a game ultimately, right? And we're all playing pretend with one another. And this is not childish. This is like adult, serious pretend play, right? And we arrange ourselves into hierarchies because, well, we can cooperate more efficiently. And ultimately, again, it grounds out in physical power. We can move more energy per unit time when we cooperate than when we don't. So the ability for abstract power enables greater projection of physical power. And that's it's a big idea, but very important for being human. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, click here to find more just like it, and here to find our most recent episode. Also, make sure to like this video to help shine light on the corruption of money, and be sure to subscribe to this channel to stay connected.